Hi, everyone. I hope that you are all doing well despite the sad circumstances. My name is Celia Hudent. I'm an advisor for the GDC UX Summit. I am a PhD in psychology and I've been working in the game industry for over 12 years. I've worked at Ubisoft, at LucasArts, and at Epic Games, and I've been independent for the past 4 or 5 years now. And I'm joined with Anouk, who is going to introduce herself. Hi, Anouk. How are you doing?
Doing great. Good morning, afternoon, everyone. So happy to be back at GDC this year. As Celia introduced me, my name is Anouk Ben-Chavchavadze, and I've been an advisor with Celia on the UX Summit at GDC every year now. We're really excited to kick this off again. My experience is basically also similarly grounded in user experience design currently at Riot, also have some experience at Ubisoft, King, Zynga. And so, yeah, we're kicking this off today.
And I'm seeing already a lot of people in the chat, so don't hesitate to ask us your questions because we're going to answer a lot of these today. This is really the point of the live session. We have a few things prepared that we wanted to talk about, but we really want to answer your questions. So first of all, I hope that you are safe and you and your family are doing well and your loved ones. It's been a difficult past couple of years for everyone. And we hope that next year we're going to have a normal GDC in person. Hopefully, and that everything's going to be back to normal. So we have a few things that we wanted to talk about, and we wanted to talk about the state of UX and what has been changing in the past few years. Of course, as you know, we are taking care of the UX Summit, and we hope that you'll like the sessions today. So, of course, because it's remote, everything is a bit different, but we hope that you have a good time. And we also know that we have a lot of different talks about UX outside of the UX Summit. So we're excited that UX is getting more and more trendy in the game industry. The stuff also that I wanted to tell you about, of course, don't hesitate to tweet about today. So use the hashtag UX Summit so that I can retweet you and I can also look at your questions. I think other than that, we can kick off all the topics that we wanted to talk about, unless you wanted to say something else, Anouk.
Yeah, I know. Just this year is a bit different and special, and we really wanted to make sure that we had a few interactive sessions. So this is your opportunity to sort of join together as a community, to ask some questions, and to be able to kind of sort of like fill that void of having us all in person in the same location. This is our time to sort of get together and ask any questions out there, talk about some subjects. So don't be shy.
Yeah, I'll be monitoring the chat in the Swapcard thingy.
Yeah.
I'll take a look at Twitter every now and then to see if there are questions over there. But we have so many screens, it's going to be complicated because, as you know, we can't multitask efficiently. So that's going to be interesting.
That is a really great point, Celia. For those of you who don't know, the chat is going to be a really important component, we're hoping, as a part of this intro. So in Swapcard, when you sort of view, I think, full screen, there's an option to view the chat there for those of you that haven't done this before.
Indeed. And yes, we have another live session a little bit later today. So it's around, is it noon for the people in, let me check, because I have the time
it's from
here.
11:30 to 12:30 Pacific time.
Yeah, thanks, Anouk. So there's another Q&A live session where we have a few panelists with us. You're going to be Kenny Dunlap, Joe Florian, Alexandra Perry is going to be there with us, and Anouk and I moderate the session. And so be sure to be here to ask them all the questions that you have. All right. So among the things that we wanted to talk about, so the pandemic changed a lot of things, of course. There were a lot of talks around work-life balance in the past couple years. So it affected everybody, not just the people in UX, but everybody in the game industry. There was also a lot of talks around accessibility because one of the good things about the pandemic is that we did much more remote work that was actually more accessible. I'm sure that it's the same thing for GDC. It's actually more accessible for more people to participate, to be there, to watch, to ask questions. So that's one of the good things that we hope they're going to keep after the pandemic. So at least we got all these discussions being a bit more present here. And we also had some new ways of working. So we had a lot of UX testing done remotely for those of you who are in UX research, or some of you are UX designers who tested your prototypes remotely. So I saw a few people talking about how Zoom is becoming a much more part of our lives, even for UX testing. So don't hesitate to tell us in the chat how the remote work has been impacting your life, and good, and and less good. But there's some good things in there that we hope we can keep. What else, Anouk? I see there's a question already. Any tips for convincing production teams that haven't seen the light yet of the importance of good UX? Oh gosh, yeah, we're gonna get to this.
Yeah. There is definitely a section that we want to make sure that we cover around this topic. Did you want to jump into that right away, or?
No, let's go on. I think it's important to talk about work-life balance. So I'm independent, so for me, things have been different for sure. But I was already working remotely quite a bit even before the pandemic. But of course, all my traveling abruptly stopped, so that changed quite a bit. But the transition took a few months, but then a lot of people now are quite used to remote. So either meetings or workshops and webinars and stuff like that. And like I said, I was pleasantly surprised about how a lot of people could now join that could not join before, because I used to do public sessions, in live, like in person. But if you were not in the area, it was complicated for you to join. And so now I see that a lot more, many people can join. So the accessibility is really great, at least out of this. So I hope that we can keep that happening. So how is it for you, Anouk? So you work in a studio. How is it to manage the work-life balance when you're always logged in at home? And also, how is the communication? Because UX is a lot of collaborative work, and you have to coordinate with a lot of people. How is it as you work in a studio?
It's been such a whirlwind of a year for us. I also, joined a new team, and a lot of people have been in that circumstance and situation this year, of jumping on a new project without actually knowing everyone. So it presents itself with some really interesting challenges of how do you pierce through sort of getting to know people virtually. But it has also allowed for, I feel like, a lot more diverse teams, and as you say, it allows for more flexible schedules, but also allows more people to be able to work at a rhythm that kind of sort of makes sense for them. So there's been a lot of positive. I think for me, and specifically in UX, we have a ton of tools that really help to make our lives easier, to help kind of sort of collaborate, communicate. All of the cloud sort of tech that we have, which makes everything really easy to test. It's really, I think, in a lot of ways to just shown the value of prototyping and sort of sharing of documents as conversation starters. So we've done a lot of different sort of practices that are, I feel, a lot more anchored in a digital format, whereas I think previously, it's like meeting overload with a bunch of people. My life has changed incredibly, but for a lot of kind of good reasons. And I feel like we've all adapted, and I'm really curious to see how things change and evolve over the next year.
Yeah, indeed. And don't hesitate to tell us how things were for you with the other remote tools. So if you want to share that with us in the chat, don't hesitate to do this. What else? So sometimes testing is a bit complicated also to do remotely, but it seems that now things are getting up and running now.
I am curious to hear from people who are on or watching right now, if what sort of experiences and how they feel their sort of testing and research initiatives and validating some of their assumptions and designs with users, how that's gone within the last year, if they've had to really change their methods, which I assume they have, but I'm curious to know how people have kind of sort of been able to keep sort of like a pulse on the user feedback.
Indeed. So don't hesitate to share your anecdotes or anything you want to share with us. And speaking of accessibility, we had a pretty good past couple years. So during the pandemic, I worked with Catherine Nisbister on the second edition of Game Usability, and we have a lot of lovely people who chimed in, including Anouk. And we have a lot of new chapters, including a chapter on accessibility by Ian Hamilton. So I'm directly picking on Ian's insights here that he gave for the book, and the book is going to be out next year, hopefully for the live in-person GDC in March. We'll see how that goes. But he explains in his chapter that there's a lot of awareness now around accessibility. So at least that battle was won. Now there's much more awareness around accessibility in games, which is great because this is one of the most important, pillars in UX, is to care about all the users and not just a subcategory of users. And so there's some big games that really helped move the needle. So we can name, of course, The Last of Us by Naughty Dog. So they did a lot of work recently, including also Ubisoft. So Assassin's Creed Valhalla was also named a few times. I follow a lot of stuff on Twitter. And so it's not there yet, but there is now at least much more awareness and people are talking about it, and a lot of studios now are proud to show off their accessibility features and options, so that at least is a good thing.
I wouldn't say the battle has been won yet.
No, the battle of awareness.
The battle of awareness, but there is a ton of great work being put out there and great examples that can really help, I think, all studios, all production teams, all UX designers to build on sort of like good practices. So it's wonderful to see sort of such huge games in the spotlight spearheading accessibility, and we can't wait to see more.
Absolutely. And I see that Cherry Thompson is in the chat. Hi, Cherry. She's doing a lot for accessibility, and she says, next step, we can do it. So that's really heartwarming. And yes, turns out we can. So let's just do it. But, now that people are talking about it and it's becoming something to be proud of, I think that's going to maybe things are going to accelerate. Like Ian is telling in his chapter that growth is now exponential. So hopefully we're going to see a lot of more initiatives starting to kick off. And we have also a lot more advocates that are getting really louder and louder. So of course we can talk about Able Gamers. We can talk about Can I Play This and Dagger System. So there are more people and more orgs that are talking about all these important topics. So that at least, there's one good things. Of course, there's still a lot of work to do, but now hopefully the ball is going to kick, it's going to roll and get faster and faster.
There's an answer to one of our questions that we had earlier from Kai. Thank you so much for adding this. This is actually a really, I think, important thing, and not to change the topic of conversation to accessibility. I'm sure we'll jump back in, but about research specifically. So Kai says, due to the adjustment for the pandemic, external testing has been getting pushed back and back due to bandwidth issues and scope changes and what we want to test. And so I thank you for sharing this. And I understand that a lot of resources are completely strapped. Testing is one of those things that I think that we learn a lot, that there's hundreds of different methodologies and different ways we can approach things. And one of the things that we've been trying to really do is figure out a bunch of different ways that we can kind of sort of do guerrilla testing. And of course, this is hard in like world of pandemic, but there are a lot of opportunities and ways to brainstorm and always make sure that we're bringing the user back as in part of the process and making sure that we're validating our ideas and our designs with users. So thank you for sharing that. I think we're all feeling a bit of that pain, but I think it is important to remember that there are a lot of different techniques and ways that we can get some of that research done.
Yeah, sadly, UX is still seen as a part of the process. This is one of the topics that we're gonna talk about very soon. That the UX has been getting more and more trendy, but not necessarily understood. And as soon as there's a problem or a pandemic, it's like a big problem, some things are cut off and it can be research. So, and Cherry is she's saying like this totally impacts accessibility tool as well. So there's also some comment about from Nicola saying that validating some UX flows on AR phone games with playtest was definitely a challenge. So how was it for UX flows? I know this is more of your domain. Did you, so not say for AR, but is validating some of the whether it is flows or user journeys or prototypes, was it more complicated with remote tools?
I'm just reading sorry, I'm multitasking and trying to keep up with the chat at the same time. So on the AR element stuff, so I haven't personally worked in AR. It's a fascinating, completely different, fascinating like tool sets and methodology behind it, and testing is beyond crucial for AR for sure. And so I think that definitely phones make things a lot more accessible because everyone has access to them. And so specifically when I was working a lot more in mobile, it was one of the things that made it so much easier for us. And we worked with some great companies that really helped kind of sort of like source users for us, but it really made it easy to be able to kind of sort of like share out prototypes that anyone could have in you know, basically their palm, where with console development, it's obviously a lot harder because people have to have access to dev kits and so on. So I'm not sure if that specifically answers your question, but definitely, I think that probably mobile development may not have been impacted as much as console development. Maybe that's an assumption. Maybe I'm completely wrong about that, but I do feel like, I'm not sure what else to say about that.
It's okay. We don't have the answer to everything, but some things can be more complicated. Some things were made a bit not easier, but at least it made a lot of people understand that, you know, there are some solutions, and we can keep the solutions moving forward.
No, absolutely. I mean, there. And a lot of this kind of comes down to some of the collaboration tools I think that we talked about briefly earlier, how it's, I think, really made us sort of evolve the technology of not only sort of like, you know, prototype, wireframe, design creation tools, much more accessible and available sort of broadly speaking. But I think that that's also the case for sort of applying sort of like different research techniques and how we sort of like are able to share out some of our ideas and test out some of our ideas. So mobile development, in my experience, has made things a lot easier to test with users. And it's just trying to figure out how we can get, I think, some of those best practices and use some of those insights and techniques more broadly and globally.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. For AR, it's very specific, and I can see how it can be impacting. It's hard to test it outside and watch people use the game outside in real situation when we have to keep our distances physically. So of course there's a lot of challenges here, but with the vaccines coming out, hopefully that's gonna get better, and we're soon gonna get out of it. At least now we can use mixed methodologies, and that, is just expanding our horizon.
Yeah, we've got to be a little bit creative in our problem solving, which who knew we'd be good at.
Well, we have to do this in UX, right? Okay, so did you want to jump? Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about in this topic, or if anyone, so Cherry mentioned a bunch of things, but feel free to add some more comments if you want. And then we have comment, I feel remote work hampered the improvement of UX for in-house game dev tools. Not being able to just stand behind and observe someone's working. So yeah, I'm sure that this is probably happening. I know that when I was trying to develop UX strategy in a studio, the fact that, bringing people over and watch them and being behind them rather than watching the playtest remotely is really sometimes more impactful, especially in a company that has a low level of maturity, to really feel the pain of the participants. And so I can see how it can be a bit difficult. So there's some good and bad. I hope that it's not, I'm a bit fearful about how it moved back a little bit, the UX maturity. I think people talk more about UX, but because we are not in a good state of maturity, maybe it hampered even more that maturity, that understanding of what UX is about. So we'll see. I guess it's a bit early to see, but yeah, we'll see now, I guess in a few months, how that goes.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. I think that we've all sort of like really in this past year experienced a lot of things from working remotely, working alone, which is like difficult to sort of find solutions and answers to. Specifically, again, like as I say, like, starting a new team, there's so much sort of like tools, and it is a bit of an uphill battle, but we have sort of been able to, I think, in a lot of ways, through sort of sharing sessions, like sharing screens, and we've been like really good at documenting sort of processes, and being able to share those out. And so I think that a lot of that has helped, but it of course is just not the same from learning someone else, watching someone do an action and being able to kind of sort of partake that in a way that's different. And so I think that we've really had to change our way of learning and educating people on new processes, or just like, how do we sort of optimize tooling for our working situations. And I think it's made us have to think about problems differently and be a little bit more flexible. But I think that this is where these are great spaces to talk about that. And so thank you, Cherry, for adding sort of that comment, because yeah, I think the streaming, the work sessions and shadowing and stuff has also proven to be really valuable for us as well.
Yeah. Indeed. So speaking of UX maturity, maybe we can start exploring the next topic that we wanted to talk about. Where are we at in terms of UX maturity? So that's a topic that I'm really interested in, because I'm excited to see more people talk about UX. But at the same time, I'm a bit sad to see that sometimes UX is really narrowed down to only UI, or we only care about some stuff about UX, or we have still a lot of misconceptions around UX. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about UX maturity overall in the game industry. And I don't think we're in a good state yet. So I'm really excited that we talk a lot about UX. But I'm a bit worried that UX is just becoming like a lip service. And so a lot of people talking about UX, not necessarily understanding what it means, or not embracing the whole philosophy around UX. Like I like to say, UX is a mindset. It's not just a tool. It's not just a methodology. It's not just a part of the process. And I'm getting a bit concerned about the loss of the meaning behind UX. So of course, we're not all going to agree about what UX is, what is the definition of UX, and what should be the main pillars of UX. But I think we should talk about it a bit more so that we can try to push the UX maturity. So UX maturity are your different scales. Nielsen did a scale a few years ago that was updated very recently to 6 stages. So it's, overall it's like from no one is understanding UX and they're rejecting UX all the way to there's a really, the company is user-centered and there's a real will to serve the users and everything is organized around that all the way up to business. So in the game industry, we're really far from that, and to be honest, even outside the game industry, the UX maturity is not necessarily great either. But I still have a lot of people who misunderstand UX or are gonna have misconceptions about, well, UX is only about making games easier, or what about games like Dark Souls, like with UX, so it won't exist, or people who are fearful that having a UX mindset and processes that's going to hamper their creativity, or that UX is just something they would do later, like, oh yeah, we'll do the UX of the game later, as if this is something that's going to magically solve the problems in the game. So I see still a lot of things like that. So I don't know if you want to add something about this, Anouk, from your experience as a UX designer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I, I think it is something that within gaming has not matured as well as in the rest of sort of product-centric companies. And there's also sort of a lot of concern and worry in sort of more product-centric companies now around sort of like the use of design to promote sort of dark patterns. And so we're seeing some of that emerge as well, I think, as a part of game development. And it is important, I think, to stay true to sort of like the mission behind UX. And so I think it is important to keep on sort of checking to see where we currently are at in our journey. And I hope there's a day where sort of UX is as well sort of integrated as part of our sort of like thinking when we're talking about sort of, whether it's creative processes or like product creation. But we are definitely not there. And it's part of these sort of like meetups, these conversations and sharing of best practices and experiences that I think that we can continue to push for making sure that UX is always at the table.
Yeah, so in the game usability second edition, I ramble on UX maturity, and I propose to try to really think about the pillars of UX to make it clear for everyone. And I think we can discuss about this, but I really think that there's 4 main pillars. So the first one would be like it has to be user-centered. So players have to be at the center of what we do. Like even at GDC, so Anouk and I, we're reviewing all the top proposals for GDC. And oftentimes we see some people like discussing about really interesting topics, and they propose some new methodologies, but it's not been tested by anyone. So the player is not there. And that's something that we see more and more. And that's a bit concerning because UX is not about giving your opinion. So of course we have some techniques and we have guidelines and we use all of that and human factors, psychology and human computer interaction guidelines. But without the user, it's not really a UX process. So we have to have the player, the user at the center of what we do. So if we try to develop a new methodology or a new thing or a new, design tool, if it's not been tested, before and after, it's difficult to really tag it UX without the input of the player. The second big pillar for me would be that UX has to be grounded in science. So that's also something In the past years, as you know, science has been attacked quite a bit, especially like recently with the pandemic and a lot of discussions and a lot of opinions going all over the place. We can also see that in UX, and people gonna just tell their opinions because they have UX in their titles. There's sometimes an impression that they should know better. Yes, we have some knowledge in kind of science and we have knowledge in some guidelines, but UX is all about being grounded in science. So again, we need to stay humble and to back all what we say from data, unless we were talking about something really solid that we can have a lot of past academic reference in to talk about certain behaviors or certain patterns that are perceived a certain way by most people. But I think it's really important to not say that something is scientifically proven until it actually is, and stay very humble around all that we claim, even if we have PhDs and stuff, or that it's not because we did one study that we can really say it's scientifically proven. It's not to say that we can't advance our knowledge in UX from independent studies or from in-house studies at studios, but it's just one step, and it has to be replicated. And it's good enough most of the time just for us to move forward for a game, but it's not good enough to advance in terms of knowledge. So that would be the second one. The third pillar would be to think of UX as being the process and not just a part of the process. So it is an iterative process. So even if we have UX designers, they're not going to get it right the first time because you don't know what you don't know. And the whole point of having the player at the center of what we do is to uncover problems that they're going to have and make sure that we identify their goals and we can satisfy their goals and needs. And so we're not getting right in the first time. So again, we have guidelines so that we don't start from scratch completely, but it is a process. And so a lot of people don't understand that. I talked to some people in the past that were saying, well, we have a UX designer. Why didn't they get it right the first time? Well, because UX is a process. It's not a step in the process. And the last one, to me, is really important. And we're going to talk about that if we have the time, but ethics, but UX has to be benevolent. Human factors psychology and human factors engineering was all about simplifying and making people's lives safer and more agreeable from technology. And it's all about making technology improve people's lives. So games is about improving your entertainment and being in connect with your friends, especially during a pandemic. It's not about using tools or certain things to hook people or make them convert faster or make them pay more, certain things. So all these stuff that we talked a lot about that in the past year with the pandemic. So there was the good side of it, like even the WHO were saying, the World Health Organization was saying, well, we see that games are good to connect people while we are socially, physically distancing. I hate when people say social distance, physically distancing. But on the other hand, we saw that it was feeling a lot of the moral panic around games. So we can, if you want, we can talk about addiction, which is like a whole topic by itself. But it is true that there are some games that sometimes use dark patterns, so to trick people into buying more, staying longer on the platform. So this is not gonna turn people into addicts, but it is still using some patterns that are not really benevolent, just to trick people into playing more or to convert. So to me, that's not UX, because it's not, we have to find the win-win situation, definitely, because making games is very costly and very hard and very long. So of course, we're going to make decisions so that the business is going to be thriving. Yes. But as soon as the business takes over the person, the user, then we're losing this balance. And now we fall out of UX. So I don't know if you want to talk about any of these things, Anouk.
Well, yeah. So there's also a very passionate amount of responses on the topic of UX maturity. So I think we blew up the chat a little bit during that. So no, which is phenomenal. All really on topic comments, and I want to make sure that we're hitting a lot of these answers and making sure that we're looking at a lot of this. But thank you everyone for participating so much in the chat. UX maturity in games is a really tough one, and to all of Celia's point about just like the iterative process, about like making sure that the user is at the center of what we do, and this ties into a lot of sort of, I think, a lot of the confusion around all of our different roles, around a lot of our different titles, and a lot of those problems stem from that, where we don't like, a lot of companies don't have clear definitions, and somebody mentioned something about like all the companies want their unicorn, someone that can do it all. They can do the UI, the UX, the research, basically business plans. We can do it all apparently, but that's just not possible per what a lot of Celia just said. There are different specialties with different educational backgrounds, not just education, but like they're all very different and separate professions, and everyone needs to have a seat at the table, and all of those aspects need to be represented within the process that we do. So thank you. I don't know, Celia, if you've caught up on a lot of this, but
a little bit.
Yeah, the chat blew up all of a sudden. Yay! But yeah, so it's great to see everyone really active in here. I think there's some questions in here around like how do we for new graduates, what are some recommendations around sort of like let me see if I can find the chat now. Yeah, given that the state of the industry is not there yet, how would you suggest the newest generation of graduates and developers act in relation to that? That's a really interesting question, I think. There's a ton of them in here too. Sorry for just picking on this one just off the bat, but I think it is probably one of the areas I think that we can help probably as a group to try to address. Celia, I don't know if you have any specific sort of thoughts other than the 4 points that you just gave.
No, I don't have the answer, but I think it's really for us, the UX community, to express a bit better what our job is all about. It's a collaborative job, so everyone is concerned and should be concerned by UX, and you have some UX experts. And sadly, even sometimes with some friends and colleagues, we talk about, well, maybe the term user experience is a bit confusing. So I don't know. Back in the day, it was more of the term interaction design that also had its own confusion, but maybe it was a little less confusing. I don't know, but there's a lot of confusion between, someone was mentioning that in the chat, between UI art and UX design. So I don't know how to solve for that. Beyond just saying it again and again and again, what UX is all about. So that's my MO.
Yeah, I think the more we talk about it, the more we get together, the more we say these things out loud, sort of in these sort of groups, and the more that we have opportunities to have UX summits and conferences and talks, I think the more importance that it gives to sort of the differentiation of roles, and making sure that it has to also come from sort of like leadership in a lot of ways. Like we can kind of sort of continue beating our drums, but we have to have advocates. And that's why it's like UX is not just like one person's role. It is a mindset, and it has to come from sort of leadership, stakeholders, and everyone. And so part of that is, yes, small steps, showing sort of value, doing sort of like iterative process, small wins, step by step, but it is somewhat staying true to sort of the definitions of the roles, how we work with visual design, how we work with research, and making sure that we have like clear partnerships when we look at kind of sort of the work that we do.
Yeah, and we need more clarity also from, so we get more people. Like having a UX director job is going to be really important from these people to clarify a lot of things. Because again, I see a lot of just the hype around UX, and in some companies it's just getting all the hypes. Oh yeah, we heard that UX is good, so we're just gonna put them everywhere. It's just the same thing as accessibility, and again, the lip service of accessibility, or the lip service of UX, or the lip service of diversity. We see that a lot today. Like, people understand that they need to be joining the bandwagon, but they don't really understand what it means. So yeah, there's just having UX in a title, or having a lot of UX people, is not enough to have a UX mindset. So it's all of us that we need to work together to try to make that clearer. Okay, so yeah, a lot of people are saying, yeah, we need to discuss this. So yeah, there's a lot of things that we can do, and again, we don't have the solution here, but at least if we can start talking more about this, that's going to be really important.
Yeah. And Louis also said something that I think is also really pertinent to this as well, up at the top. Hi, Louis. So I think some time ago, so UX advocating tends to be pulled back at the feature level instead of the product game level. And I think that talks to the point as well of making sure that UX is involved like early enough in the process. It's not like an afterthought, like Celia mentioned, at a later date. It's not something that you can go and you can fix later. You need to think about it right when you're sort of ideating, creating. What problems are you trying to solve? For who are you trying to solve for them? So thanks for adding that.
Yep, definitely. So among the stuff that we can talk about, so there's a few things that I wanted to highlight. There's some interesting stuff around. So to get more mature, we also need to talk more about ethics, because that goes hand in hand with UX. It goes with the pillar, like we have the player at the center of what we do. So we need to take care of all the users, and we need to do no harm. So we actually have talked about ethics today, this morning for Pacific time. So we need to talk more about ethics and what it means. So I don't know if you followed, but a few colleagues and myself, we started to work on a draft on the code of ethics. So if you want to check it out, this is called ethicalgames.org. We didn't do a lot of stuff in the past year. Sadly, the first step is to get some more research done, or at least some data coming from academic researchers, because again, UX is grounded in science, and so should be a code of ethics, so that it can be evidence-based and not, just our gut feelings. So right now it's just a draft, and we need the help of academics. So a few are have inserted the call, but a few others were also like super overwhelmed during the pandemic, because most researchers are also teachers, and it was very hard to work with the students, and was a very, very draining year for them. So I'm hoping that we can start again in September, October, and I can gather some more data, and to hopefully try to work on a more refined code of ethics, and to ultimately, have everybody in the game industry chime in, and maybe one day like have studios pledging for it. But ethics is definitely something that I think we need to talk about more. That's going to help push forward the UX maturity. Okay, so among the things that we can talk about regarding ethics is talking about disruptive behavior. So there's a few interesting things I'm going to put in the chat, but I'll do a thread also on Twitter for those who are not in the chat. But ADL and Fair Play Alliance did some work together to give some guidelines to make the game safer for players. So that's really important. Again, if we want to be benevolent, we have to make sure it's a safe space for everyone. And so we need to tackle the disruptive behavior and make sure that no one feels any toxicity online. And that's complicated. Of course, as you know, harassment is sadly very present in multiplayer games. So I invite you to check out the resource that I put in there. And also the Fair Play Alliance did a lot of interesting stuff during the pandemic. And so I'm just going to share this and gave some guidelines to what to do during the pandemic, and to answer to all the parents that are a bit afraid of games, and how much it's much more present with the kids, because of course games are connecting people. It's a very powerful socially, and so some parents are getting a bit scared with the time that their kids are spending, and they're recommending that we spend some time working with parents, and not just addressing the kids or the teenagers or the young adults, but also working with parents and try to address their concern, because it's also part of our jobs to make sure that everybody, all the people playing, but also their parents for players or minors, feel that everybody's safe. So I invite you to check it out. It's fairly interesting stuff. And maybe should we start talking about inclusion? I see that it's already, we're already like, the time is moving
fast. Time is flying by. Absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the last things that we definitely wanted to hit on as a part of today was to talk about inclusion. And I feel like we've made some really big strides in the last years, and seeing how in most of the companies that I've worked at, this has been really sort of not just in how we hire, not just how we build teams, but also how we look at building products. And it's been really I think empowering for a lot of people to be able to see representations of themselves within games, but also just like, how we go about showing authentic self sort of like portrayals. So that's, I think we've gone a long way, and I think we take it for granted. And I think it's so important to point out where we used to be and where we are today. And I think it's been really lovely that this is such an important part of game creation now. We still have a long way to go. We're not perfect, but I think we've gone a really long way. So there's definitely, I think, just like all of the representations in games, but also just like how we go about hiring, making sure that we have like diverse, varied teams, and everyone is basically sort of has a voice at the table, goes a long way to make sure that whenever we're making games, we're making them for everyone. So I think that is something that's like near and dear to my heart, and I feel like we're in a so much better place now than we were like 10 years ago.
Yeah, but we started from a very low and the inclusivity ladder.
We have not won the battle.
Yeah, so there's a little bit more representation, but there's still a lot of stereotypes, and we're still not out of the woods. But again, there's more awareness, so more people are talking about it, but we're still in many cases at the lip service stage. So hopefully, if we can also push for more inclusion in hiring and in promotion,
also.
Yeah, we can maybe move the needle there. But there's still a lot of work to do. So we need to tackle our biases in hiring, because we have a tendency to hire the people who look like us because we feel more comfortable, and we're like, oh yeah, it's part of the culture, and sometimes we're not going to hire someone because it's not the cultural fit. And if we don't define what is the culture and what is the value at the company, which in many cases it's not defined because there's not a good maturity at the studios, then it's opening the door to just not hiring the people you're not feeling comfortable with. So here I'm going to recommend a great book from Regine Gilbert. It's called Inclusive Design for a Digital World. So Regine tackles accessibility, but there's also a lot of talks around inclusion and how to design for inclusivity. And one of the recommendations that Regine is making in her book is to try to be more aware of your lenses, as she talks about it. So we all have different lenses. We all have different biases. We all have them. And it's not because we're going to be more aware of them that we're going to be able to overcome them, because most of the time they're implicit. But at least if you know your lenses, if you know your biases, you can try to be more aware of it. And so try to change the environment, like your recruitment environment or your design process, to account for these lenses and biases. So I didn't prepare the link for the book, so I'm going to type it at the same time as I speak. So if you want to take over, Anouk, do that. That would
No,
be
I
great.
enjoy seeing you suffer.
I love you, Anouk. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My pleasure. There we go.
So that's one of the things we can do. But of course, there's still so many things to do here. And I feel that the UX community has a great role here, because again, it's one of the pillars to design for everyone, and to make sure that everybody's going to be safe and everybody's going to be included. And so I think we have a great role to play. So of course, right now we don't have enough maturity in terms of UX to really have a seat at the table in most cases. But if you do have a seat at the table, try to push for these topics and to look around and see who's not at the table, so that we can make sure that everyone is included. But yeah, it's still a lot of work to do, but I'm hopeful. I think there's also more pressure from the public, from the players, and that's great, because that's also, players, they can vote with their money, and definitely the stakeholders are going to be sensitive to that if they're not sensitive to the humanistic values of UX, where sadly sometimes not enough. At least the business elements of inclusion, we know when your design is more inclusive, it's going to sound better. So maybe that's going to help. All right. Were there any comments or questions in the chat? I know, because I'm sure you were thoroughly looking at the chat when I was talking.
There is a very lovely sort of like thread still very much around, I think, UX maturity and dealing with a lot of the issues. I mean, it's, the typical sort of unicorn issue, I think, of expecting sort of UX and UI to somewhat, have one person own both of those roles, but also interestingly enough about where UX starts within the process. And there's a bit of a thread here that talks about UX sort of coming in after a design pass. And I think that there is definitely a lot of opportunity and room for growth there. I think that ideally, as much as possible, UX and game design are seen as a partnership and as a sort of collaborative and also like iterative sort of. There definitely needs to be, I think, a point sort of within the process where somebody needs to take the lead on some specific actions, but it needs to be a conversation. It needs to be a back and forth. And that's how most of the successful game teams that I worked on have functioned. So it is very much a collaborative and iterative process. And I think that depending on sort of the feature or the type of project or game that you're working on, we'll all work with various different individuals with different skill sets. But it's about figuring out how always just to bring the user back as in like a part of the process, and figuring out all of those opportunities that we can kind of sort of either sort of test or iterate and get player feedback on and validate a lot of the ideas so that we can have a more successful iterative process.
Indeed. And so there's some questions in the question tab, because we kind of forgot this tab.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know, right? So we're going to now answer those questions. Sorry about that. We're just looking at the chat to make sure everyone was listened to. So there's a question. I recently started my UX UI career in the industry a month ago, and previously I was working in the same role for advertising. I know each of the projects may be different, but is it usual to work most of the time after the game designer's execution in the process?
So this is yeah, that's what I was, I think, just referencing, just answering this question, because it also showed up in all of these shows up in the chat. So I think, yeah, per sort of the examples that I've just talked about is in, I think that generally speaking, very sort of early on in my career, I think that this was definitely, sort of not necessarily a habit or a process, but there is very much sort of a need to have some form of game design pass on an idea, some form of like document that gets written out, an idea that gets stated and worked on. And I think that through my career, I think that generally speaking, the way that I've worked this is very closely with design. Is just once this idea is formulated, if I'm partnering with one specific individual or a team as a UX designer, I think that it is very helpful to have that sort of like formulaic sort of, okay, this is like what game design thinks about this problem, and it's working then afterwards and saying like, okay, well, how can we bring back the user as a part of this? How would basically the user interact with this? What are the touch points? What are the motivations, goals? And those are worked out with the designer as well, but it does sort of like lead into that conversation in that iterative process, which it is not unlikely to have sort of like a game design execution first. Obviously, if it's like, thrown over sort of, and they say execute this and there's no discussion, there's an issue there. But as long as it is that conversation, it is that iterative process between game design and UX, I think that is sort of somewhat part of the iterative process.
Thanks, Anouk, for your insight. Okay, so there are too many questions. We still need to announce all the talk. So
yeah.
let's see. Greta, hi, Greta. We work together on Rainbow Six at UCF Montreal. So any tips for convincing production teams that haven't seen the light yet of the importance of good UX? Yes, but that's kind of a long discussion. This is actually what I tried to lay down in my chapter for the game usability book. It depends where you're at. If there's really rejection about UX, it's really about advocacy and talking about the limitations of the brain and give examples of how multitasking is a myth and perception is subjective and memory is fallible. So I use that a lot and do a lot of little games to make people realize that the limitations that we have, and we do need to take that into account to offer a better experience. I think it's really important for people to understand that an experience cannot be designed. It's something that is experienced by people in their mind as they play. So experience lie in the eye and the mind of the beholder. And we're here to try to offer them the experience that we intended. But at the end of the day, we can't design it proper, because an experience is what people feel in the end. And so that's the reason why we need UX methodology, because it's all about shifting from our own perspective to adopt the perspective of the user. And this is when we can start to show some quick wins through UX design tools and techniques and UX research. Oftentimes, the quick wins can be really demonstrated with some research, like quick and dirty, to show like if you have different prototypes, you can test different prototypes and see which one works better, or solve like an issue through iteration and show how it's impacting positively the game. But then at some point, it's going to be hard to get over that stage where people understand, UX research is great, and it's just going to be one step in the process. This is when it's getting really difficult to advocate for a real UX strategy and to have a complete understanding of that across the company. So I would link you to the latest article in Norman Nielsen and ngroup.com. They readjusted their scale for UX Imagery. You'll find some tips there. But because I see like we only have like 1 minute and 30 seconds to announce everything and then end the talk. So I'm sorry if we could not get over all the questions. We're still going to be there in the chat for a few minutes after the talk is over. So I'm going to take some time to answer in the chat and also on Twitter for all the questions that remained unanswered. Should we start just by introducing all the talks, Anouk?
Yeah,
in the minute that we
absolutely.
have? All right, so at 9:40, so all these times are in Pacific. We're going to have a talk by Joe Florian and Alexandra Perry on expanding the Dreamiverse, making dreams an experience for everyone. That's going to be an interesting talk to see how production and UX research can work together. So that's part of UX maturity, and try to see how we can have better a production pipeline and tools. Then we have Do No Harm, Ethical Design for Emotionally Heavy Games by Kelly Dunlap. So that's going to be also very interesting. We talked a lot about ethics. So that's definitely a talk to look forward to. Then we have the Q&A live panel where Anouk and I are going to be moderating some questions for the speakers that talked before. Anouk, you want to introduce the next one?
Yeah. So Julia is going to talk to us about learning UX through the evolution of playing cards. Love this talk. I think that it is a really interesting way of looking at sort of like UX design through time. So some really interesting examples there.
And then we're going to have Morgan Baker is going to talk about accessibility. So another hot topic. So the talk is about approaching accessibility in production, a practical mindset for developers. So two words I love here, like mindset and accessibility.
And the last talk is also very much about UX maturity, lessons learned from DICE, UX buy-in through trust. Eric is going to be presenting that at the end of the day today.
All right, and now we are out of time, Anouk. So I was worried we wouldn't have enough questions, but I guess now we're talking too much. So we need to stop and to let all the other lovely speakers of the day. So we hope that you will have a great, remote GDC this year, a great week, and a great UX summit. And please, if you have anything to talk about regarding UX for next year, the submission is going to be very soon for our next session. Hopefully in person, we'll see. So remember about this, the pillars about the user at the center, the player at the center, grounded in the science, process, and benevolence, because these are really definitely hot topics we want to cover at the UX Summit.